Kang Min-ho stood frozen in his penthouse lab, staring at the woman who'd just materialized out of thin air in a burst of blue light, wearing clothes from another century, eyes wide with terror, skin glowing like polished mahogany under his fluorescent lights. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and according to every law of physics he'd spent 15 years mastering, she shouldn't exist. But she did, breathing hard, smelling like rain and something ancient, looking at him like he was her last hope in a world that had gone mad. And in that moment, something inside him that had been dormant, cold, untouchable, roared to life with a hunger that terrified him. Welcome to AfroKorean Drama Hub, dear friend. If you love stories where time can't stop destiny, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and tell me in the comments, do you believe some loves are written in the stars across centuries? Now let's dive in. Min-ho was Korea's most brilliant quantum physicist, respected in academic circles, feared in boardrooms because his research could revolutionize energy production and make him the most powerful man in Asia. At 32, he'd built an empire on genius and cold calculation. He didn't do emotions, didn't do distractions, didn't do anything that couldn't be measured, tested, and proven. His lab was his sanctuary, cold and sterile, exactly how he liked his life, until she crashed into it, literally. The temporal displacement field he'd been testing for 3 years suddenly activated on its own at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, ripping open a hole in space-time with a sound like thunder splitting the sky. And out stumbled Ife, gasping, disoriented, dressed in traditional African wraps from what looked like the 1800s, cowrie shells braided into her thick natural hair, gold bangles on her wrists, eyes wild with confusion and fear. She hit the floor hard, and Min-ho caught her on instinct, his hands closing around her waist. The contact sent electricity shooting through his entire nervous system, every nerve ending coming alive in a way that felt dangerous and addictive. Her skin was warm, impossibly soft, real, too real. She looked up at him, and those eyes, dark brown and infinite like the universe itself, locked onto his. For a moment that stretched into eternity, neither of them breathed. The lab disappeared. The equations on his monitors meant nothing. There was only her, this impossible woman in his arms, looking at him with such raw vulnerability that something in his chest cracked open. Then she spoke in a language he didn't recognize, rapid and panicked, pushing against his chest with surprising strength. Min-ho's translator app picked up fragments, Yoruba, ancient dialect. She was asking where she was, what year it was, how she got here, why the world looked like this. 2024, he said slowly in English, hoping she'd understand. Seoul, South Korea. You're safe. I promise you're safe. Her eyes went wider, impossibly wide, and she shook her head violently. 2024? She repeated the word like it was poison, like it could kill her. Then she looked around his lab, at the holographic displays floating in mid-air, the quantum computers humming with processing power, the modern city skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows 40 stories up, and her legs gave out completely. Min-ho caught her again, lowering her carefully into his ergonomic desk chair, his hands steadying her shoulders. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "This can't be real," she whispered in accented but surprisingly clear English. "I was just home, in my village, Yorubaland, 1847. The elders were performing the sacred ritual to send me forward through time to find the cure for the sickness killing our people. They said I'd travel 1 moon cycle forward, maybe 2 at most, not—" She gestured helplessly at everything around her, at the impossible future she'd landed in. Not this, not almost 200 years. Min-ho's scientific mind was reeling, theories colliding, everything he thought he knew about temporal mechanics shattering and reforming. Time travel. Actual, impossible, physics-defying time travel. And she was the proof, sitting in his lab, trembling and terrified, smelling like wood smoke and shea butter, and something he couldn't name but wanted to drown in. He should have been focused on the discovery, on what this meant for his research, for science, for the future of humanity. Instead, all he could think about was how her hand felt in his when he took it to check her pulse, how her voice sounded when she said his name after he introduced himself, how something primal and possessive in him was screaming mine, protect, keep, never let go. He'd never felt anything like it in his entire controlled, rational life. It was terrifying, it was addictive, it was completely illogical. And he didn't care. The next morning, after letting Ive sleep in his guest room because she had nowhere else to go, and he couldn't bring himself to let her out of his sight, Min-ho sat across from her at breakfast in his penthouse kitchen, watching her stare suspiciously at the toaster like it might explode. She'd changed into his younger sister's clothes that he'd had emergency delivered at dawn, dark jeans and a soft cream sweater that hugged curves that made his mouth go dry, and his scientific objectivity completely disappear. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow, a hint of her natural spirit returning despite the obvious fear and disorientation. "In my time, men who stare get slapped," she said, her accent making the words somehow both threatening and musical. He almost smiled, something he rarely did. "In my time, women who threaten violence get escorted out." "Then escort me," she challenged, eyes flashing with defiance that made his pulse spike. "Where exactly would I go? I don't exist in this world. I have no papers, no identification, no family, no home, no proof I'm even a real person. I'm trapped here until you figure out how to send me back to where I belong." The word trapped hit him harder than it should have, like a physical blow to the chest, because part of him, a dark, selfish part he didn't want to acknowledge or examine, didn't want to send her back. Ever. Wanted to keep her here in his world, in his space, where he could see her and touch her and make sure she was safe. He pushed the thought away violently. It was wrong, unethical, impossible. "I'll figure it out," he promised, his voice rougher than intended. "My research brought you here. I can reverse the process, send you home to your time, your people." Something flickered across her face, gone too fast to identify. Relief? Disappointment? Fear? She looked away quickly, her fingers twisting in her lap. "How long will it take?" "I don't know. Weeks, maybe months. The temporal mathematics are complex." "Months," she repeated softly, the word barely audible. Then she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin with a pride that made his chest ache with something he refused to name. "Then I need work, a way to survive here while I wait. I won't be your charity case, Dr. Kang. I won't be dependent on your kindness or trapped in this glass tower like some kept woman." Min-ho respected that, admired it even. Her strength, her pride, her refusal to be diminished by impossible circumstances. So he made calls, pulled strings with contacts in academia and cultural institutions, and by the end of the week, If was working as a special cultural consultant at the National Museum, helping authenticate African artifacts and historical pieces. She was brilliant at it, catching forgeries the so-called experts had missed for years, sharing knowledge from first-hand experience that left scholars speechless and scrambling to revise their papers. Min-ho told himself he visited the museum 3 times that first week just to check on her progress, to make sure she was adjusting well, to ensure his reputation wasn't damaged by association with this mysterious woman who'd appeared from nowhere. Not because he needed to see her smile when she explained the intricate meaning behind ancient symbols. Not because watching her move through the exhibits with such confidence and grace made him feel things he had no right to feel for a woman who didn't belong in his timeline. But then on the 4th visit, he saw the young curator, Kim Tae-sung, lean too close while she examined a bronze sculpture, his hand touching her lower back in a way that was too familiar, too intimate, his smile too warm as he whispered something that made her laugh. The jealousy that ripped through Min-ho was volcanic, irrational, completely out of proportion to the situation. He crossed the gallery in 6 strides, his hand closing around Ife's wrist, pulling her away from Tae-sung with barely controlled fury that shocked even him. "We need to go," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze the air between them. Ife blinked at him, then at his hand on her wrist, then back at his face with dawning realization. "Excuse me. Now. We're leaving now." He didn't wait for her to agree, just guided her firmly toward the exit, ignoring Tae-sung's confused and slightly intimidated expression, ignoring the curious stares of other museum visitors. Outside in the parking lot, Ife yanked her wrist free, eyes blazing with a fury that matched his own. "What is wrong with you? I was working. I was doing my job." "He was touching you." The words came out harsh, possessive. "So?" She stepped closer, challenging him. "So what? So you don't let men touch you like that?" "You don't own me, Min-ho." Each word was sharp, precise, cutting. "You're not my husband, not my father, not my brother, not anything to me except the scientist trying to send me back to my own time. Remember? That's all this is. A scientific problem you're trying to solve so you can get rid of me and go back to your cold, empty life." Every word was a knife sliding between his ribs, because she was right. He had no claim on her, no right to feel this consuming need to keep every other man away from her, to mark her as his, to make sure everyone knew she was off limits. But logic didn't stop the feeling, didn't stop the possessive rage that had nearly made him punch Tae-sung in the face, didn't stop him from wanting to lock her away somewhere only he could reach. That evening, Min-ho stood in his penthouse lab, staring at equations that wouldn't balance, trying to focus on the temporal displacement calculations instead of the memory of Ife's skin under his fingers, the sound of her laugh at something another man had said, the way she'd looked at him with such disappointment and anger. His phone rang, shattering his concentration. His assistant, Park Ji-won, sounding stressed. "Sir, there's a situation. Someone leaked photos of you with the museum consultant. The tabloids are calling her your secret girlfriend. Your board of directors wants an explanation before the stockholders' meeting tomorrow morning. They're concerned about your judgment." Min-ho closed his eyes, fighting the headache building behind his temples. Of course, nothing stayed private in his world, not when you were worth billions and controlled technology that could change civilization. "Handle it," he said flatly. "Tell them it's none of their business. Tell them to focus on quarterly reports." "Sir, your reputation, the company's stock price." "I said handle it, Ji-won." He hung up and immediately called Ife, suddenly worried about how this would affect her. She answered on the third ring, sounding breathless and upset. "Min-ho, what's wrong? Why are you calling so late?" "Don't go online, don't read the news, and don't leave your apartment tonight." "Why? What happened? You're scaring me." He could hear the fear creeping into her voice, could picture her pacing her small studio apartment worrying. "The press found out about you. They're digging into your background, asking questions. I'm coming over right now." "No, don't. It's late and you don't need to." But he was already grabbing his keys, already in the elevator, already breaking every traffic law to get to her neighborhood in Itaewon. 20 minutes later, he was at her door, and the moment she opened it, he saw the tears she was trying desperately to hide, the phone in her shaking hand showing article after vicious article. "They're saying terrible things," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Calling me a gold digger, a scheming foreigner trying to trap Korea's most eligible bachelor. They found the museum records, figured out I have no background, no history, no records before last week. They're asking questions I can't answer without sounding insane. They're going to expose me, Min-ho. They're going to figure out I don't belong here, and then what happens to me?" Min-ho stepped inside, closed and locked the door behind him, and did the only thing that felt right in that moment. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist. She resisted for half a second, pride making her stiffen, then collapsed against him completely, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. "I don't belong here," she said against his shirt, her tears soaking through the expensive fabric. "I don't belong in this time, in this world, in your life. I'm just making everything worse for you. Maybe you should just send me back now, before this gets any more complicated." "You belong with me." The words came out before he could stop them, before he could analyze or rationalize or talk himself out of the truth, raw, honest, terrifying. If pulled back, looking up at him with wide, disbelieving eyes still wet with tears. "What did you just say?" He should have taken it back. should have made it professional, safe, meaningless. Instead, he cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears with a tenderness that surprised them both. "You belong with me," he repeated, meaning every impossible word. "I don't care what year you're from, I don't care what the press says or what my board thinks or what makes logical sense. I care about you, Ife, more than I should, more than makes any kind of rational sense, and I'm not letting anyone hurt you or expose you or take you away from me." Her breath hitched, her hands coming up to grip his wrists. "Min-ho, this is insane. We barely know each other. I've been here 2 weeks." "I know. I'm not staying. I can't stay. My people need me. The cure for the sickness. That's why the elders sent me forward." "I know that too." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "But right now, in this moment, can we just stop pretending we don't feel this thing between us? This impossible, illogical thing that's been driving me crazy since the second you appeared in my lab." "Tell me you don't feel it too," he challenged, searching her eyes desperately. "Tell me I'm insane and imagining this and I'll back away. I'll be professional. I'll work on sending you home and never touch you again." "You are insane," she whispered, but her hands slid up his arms to his shoulders, pulling him closer instead of pushing him away. "This is the most insane thing I've ever been part of, but I—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I feel it too. God help me, I feel it too. From that first moment when you caught me, when you looked at me like I was something precious instead of just a scientific anomaly. I've never felt anything like this in my entire life." "Then stop fighting it," he said against her lips, so close he could feel her breath. "For tonight, just stop fighting." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his with a desperation that matched the chaos in his own chest. The kiss was fire and need and everything he'd been holding back for 2 weeks of torture. He backed her against the wall, hands sliding into her hair, kissing her like she was oxygen and he was drowning, like she was the answer to questions he'd been asking his whole life without knowing it. She made a sound in the back of her throat that drove him absolutely wild, her fingers clutching his shirt, pulling him closer, demanding more. "Bedroom?" he managed to ask between kisses, his voice barely recognizable. She nodded breathlessly, and he lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her down the short hallway to her small bedroom. What happened next was private, sacred, a collision of souls across time itself. Hands learning skin with reverent attention, whispered names like prayers, promises neither of them should make but couldn't hold back. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only them, tangled together in the darkness, burning with a heat that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with destiny. Ours. Later, as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, Min-ho woke to cold sheets and an empty bed. If was gone. No note, no explanation, just the fading scent of her on the pillow and the crushing weight of her absence. Panic hit him like a freight train, stealing his breath. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands, called her number. No answer. Called again, straight to voicemail. Called the museum. She hadn't shown up for work. He checked the lab frantically. Not there. He used every resource at his disposal, called in every favour, spent the next 3 days searching for her like a man possessed, barely sleeping or eating, his assistant and security team looking at him with growing concern as he became more frantic and irrational. Finally, on the 4th day, his head of security found her. In a small church in Itaewon, the Nigerian Community Centre, helping recent immigrants with legal paperwork and translation services, hiding in plain sight among people who wouldn't ask too many questions about her past. Min-ho walked into that church at noon on a Saturday and found her sitting with an elderly woman, patiently explaining visa requirements in Yoruba, her natural hair pulled back, wearing simple clothes, looking like she'd found some kind of peace without him. His heart clenched so hard he couldn't breathe for several seconds. She looked up, felt his presence before she saw him, and her expression immediately shuttered, walls slamming down. "Ife," he said quietly, aware of the other people in the room watching them with curiosity. "We need to talk, please." She said something gentle to the elderly woman, then stood slowly, walking past him toward the door without making eye contact. He followed her outside into the cold November air, into the small garden behind the church where they could have privacy. "You left," he said, trying to keep the accusation and hurt out of his voice. "Failed completely." "I had to." She still wouldn't look at him, her arms wrapped around herself protectively. "Why? Did I do something wrong? Did I hurt you? Because if I did, I'm sorry, I never meant to." "You didn't do anything wrong." She cut him off, her voice thick with emotion. "That's the problem, Min-ho. That night was perfect. It meant something to me, something real and deep and terrifying, and it shouldn't have, because I don't belong in your world. I'm not staying in this time, and the longer I pretend otherwise, the longer I let myself fall deeper into whatever this is between us, the harder it's going to be to leave when the time comes. And I will have to leave. My people are counting on me." "Then don't leave." He grabbed her hand, spinning her to face him, his other hand cupping her jaw so she had to meet his eyes. "Stay here, with me, build a life in this time." "I can't," she said, tears streaming down her face now, her composure breaking. "My people are dying, Min-ho, children, elders, everyone I love back in my time. The sickness is spreading, killing dozens every day. The ritual sent me forward to find the cure, and I've been so distracted by you, by this impossible thing between us, by feelings I have no right to have, that I've forgotten my purpose. I've forgotten why I'm here, and that makes me selfish and terrible and—" "What if your purpose is here?" He was desperate now, his thumbs wiping away her tears even as new ones fell. "What if the cure isn't something you find and bring back, but something you create here in this time with modern medicine and technology? What if I can help you save them without you having to go back and leave me?" She stared at him, hope and doubt warring in her expression. "What are you saying? How could that possibly work?" "I'm saying there are ways, medical research, synthesizing compounds from historical records. If you can describe the symptoms, the progression, maybe we can identify the pathogen and create a cure that works across time. It's theoretically possible. If—" He never got to finish explaining his theory, because that's when everything went to hell. 3 black SUVs with government plates pulled up to the church, tires screeching, and men in dark suits with serious faces poured out, surrounding them in a tight circle. Min-ho recognized the lead agent immediately. Government, National Intelligence Service, Temporal Security Division that wasn't supposed to exist officially. His blood went ice cold. "Dr. Kang Min-ho," the agent said formally, pulling out credentials and handcuffs simultaneously. "You're under arrest for illegal temporal experimentation, unauthorized manipulation of space-time, and harboring an undocumented temporal refugee in violation of the International Temporal Accord of 2019. Min-ho's mind raced. There were temporal laws. Of course there were. He'd been so focused on the science he'd ignored the legal implications. "On whose authority?" he demanded, stepping fully in front of Ife protectively. "The Korean government in coordination with the United Nations Temporal Security Council," the agent replied. "And the woman comes with us. She's classified as a temporal anomaly, property of the state for study and potential deportation back to her original timeline." "Property!" Ife's voice was sharp with fury and disbelief. "I'm a person, not property. You can't just—" "You're a scientific impossibility that could destabilize the entire timeline if not properly contained and studied," another agent interrupted. "Your very existence here creates paradoxes. You need to be secured for everyone's safety." Min-ho stepped closer to Ife, his arms sliding around her waist, pulling her against him. "You're not taking her anywhere. She's not a threat. She's not property. And I won't let you treat her like some laboratory specimen." "Sir, don't make this difficult. We have authorization to use force if necessary." "Then you'll have to use it." Min-ho had already calculated his next move, his mind working faster than theirs. "Because I'm not letting you touch her." But Min-ho had miscalculated how many agents there were, how prepared they'd been. They moved fast, professionally. 2 agents tackled him to the ground before he could react, his head hitting concrete hard enough to make his vision blur. If screamed his name, fighting against the hands that grabbed her arms, dragged her toward the vehicles. "Min-ho, don't hurt him! Please don't hurt him!" "Mum, stop resisting. This will be easier if you cooperate." "Let me go. Min-ho!" The last thing Min-ho saw before they forced a hood over his head and knocked him unconscious with something injected into his neck was Ife's terrified face, tears streaming, being pushed into one of the SUVs. Then everything went black. When he woke, he was in a holding cell, clean but sterile. No windows, no phone, no lawyer. Just 4 concrete walls, a cot, and the crushing knowledge that Ife was somewhere in government custody, probably, scared out of her mind, being treated like a threat instead of a person, and he couldn't get to her, couldn't protect her, couldn't keep his promise. 3 days passed in that cell. 3 days of interrogation about his research, about how he'd created the temporal displacement field, about whether he'd done it intentionally to bring Ife forward. 3 days of refusing to cooperate, of demanding to see her, of making increasingly creative threats against everyone involved. Finally, his lawyer, the best criminal defense attorney money could buy, got him released on the condition that he cooperate fully with the temporal investigation and surrender all his research data. The first thing Min-ho did after walking out of that facility was storm the government research centre where they were holding Ife, using every connection he had, every favour owed, every piece of leverage he'd accumulated in his career. Security tried to stop him at the entrance. He didn't care, didn't slow down, would burn the whole building down to get to her if necessary. He found her 3 floors down in a sterile observation room, hooked up to monitoring equipment like she was some kind of experiment, wearing a grey jumpsuit instead of her own clothes, looking small and exhausted and so damn brave it broke something in his chest. "Min-ho?" She sat up fast when she saw him burst through the door, hope flooding her face so completely it hurt. "How did you—" "Doesn't matter." He was already across the room, disconnecting the monitors with quick, efficient movements, ignoring the alarms that started blaring immediately. "We're leaving, right now." "They'll arrest you again. They'll make everything worse." She grabbed his hands, stopping him. "Min-ho, maybe this is for the best. Maybe I should just go back. They said they can send me back to my exact moment, that it's safer for everyone." "No." The word came out harsh, final. "I'm not leaving you here to be studied and poked and treated like... You're not human. You're not going back unless that's what you truly want. You're mine, Ife, and I protect what's mine." "Yours?" She searched his eyes, looking for something. "Yes." He cupped her face with both hands, leaning close. "Mine, if you'll have me. Across time, across worlds, across whatever laws or governments or impossibilities stand in our way. I love you. I'm in love with you, and I'm not letting you go without a fight." Tears spilled over, but she was smiling. "You love me, you're sure? Because this is insane and complicated and... I've never been more sure of anything in my entire life." He kissed her hard, fast, desperate. "Now let's go before security gets here." They made it out of the facility, but the repercussions were immediate and severe. Min-ho's research was shut down completely, his funding pulled, his laboratory seized, his reputation destroyed overnight in carefully leaked stories about reckless experimentation. He lost his position at the university, lost his board seat at his own company, lost everything he'd built over 15 years of work. He didn't care. He had Ife safe in his penthouse, and that was all that mattered. But the government wasn't done. 2 weeks later, the Temporal Security Council issued an ultimatum delivered by the same agent who'd arrested them. "You have a choice, Dr. Kang," the agent said, sitting across from them in Min-ho's living room, like this was a social call. "Send her back to 1847 using your research and face no further charges, or keep her here and we'll deport her forcibly and file criminal charges that will put you in prison for the next 20 years. "You can't do that," Min-ho said through clenched teeth. "Actually, we can. Temporal law is clear. Refugees from other timelines must be returned unless they can prove they pose no risk to timeline stability. She can't prove that. Her very existence here creates paradoxes we don't fully understand yet." If was quiet beside him. her hand, gripping his so tight it hurt. Finally she spoke. "What if I volunteer to go back? If I choose it willingly, if Min-ho helps me return safely, can you guarantee he won't face charges?" The agent considered this. "If you return voluntarily and we can verify the timeline is stable after your departure, then yes, Dr. Kang will face no further legal action." "No," Min-ho said immediately, turning to her. "No, you don't have to do this. We'll fight this. Min-ho." She touched his face gently. "I can't let you go to prison for me. I can't let you lose everything because of me. And maybe they're right. Maybe I was always meant to go back, to save my people, to finish what I started." The following week, they stood in his rebuilt lab, looking at the temporal displacement field he'd reconstructed just for this. Min-ho had run the calculations 1,000 times, trying to find a loophole, a way to keep her here without destroying both their lives. There wasn't one. "I can send you back," he said quietly, his voice hollow. "Back to 1847, to the exact moment you left, with medical knowledge that can help you create the cure. But if I do this, it erases us. The timeline corrects itself. You go back, save your people, live your life in your own time, and I stay here, never knowing you existed. Every memory we made, every moment we shared, it disappears like it never happened." "How do you know that?" She turned to face him, tears already falling. "Because I've run every possible simulation. The timeline doesn't allow paradoxes. You can't exist in both times. You go back, and this version of reality where we met, where we fell in love, it collapses, gets written over. You'll remember because you're the one travelling, but I won't. I'll wake up the day after my experiment failed and never know what I lost." "So the choice is my people or you," she whispered. "That's the choice." His voice broke on the words. "That's not fair." "I know, nothing about this is fair." They stood there in silence for a long moment, the machine humming softly, ready to tear them apart across centuries. Then Ife spoke, her voice stronger than he expected. "My people have healers, strong ones, traditional medicine that's been passed down for generations, and the sickness you said it might be a paradox for me to interfere, to change what happened." "Your people matter more than timeline stability," Min-ho said fiercely. "If you can save them, you should." "But what if they didn't need me to save them?" She was looking at him now with an intensity that stole his breath. "What if I just learned about this from my grandmother's stories, and I assumed I was part of it, but actually the sickness passed on its own after one season? What if my people survived, Min-ho, without me having to go back and change anything?" He stared at her. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I choose you." The words came out strong, certain, no hesitation. "I choose love across time. I choose this impossible thing we've built. I choose staying in this timeline with you over returning to a past where we never existed together." "But your people—" "Survived," she said firmly. "I remember now, the stories. The sickness came, took many lives, but then ended as mysteriously as it began. The village recovered, grew, thrived. The elders sent me forward thinking I needed to find a cure, but maybe what I actually needed to find was you, was this life, was proof that love can be stronger than time itself. Are you absolutely sure?" He needed her to be sure, couldn't let her make this choice out of fear or pressure. "Because if you stay, there's no going back. The government will fight this. Your life here will be complicated." "I'm sure," she said, stepping into his arms. "I'm choosing you, Min-ho, today and every day after." He kissed her then, like she was air and he was drowning, like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked, like she was home. "Then we do this my way," he said when they finally broke apart. "I'm making this legal, official, unbreakable." That night, Min-ho made calls, important calls, to government officials, legal experts, immigration specialists. He found a loophole in the temporal laws, one that said if a temporal refugee married a citizen and could prove their presence created no timeline disruption, they could apply for permanent asylum in the current timeline. It took 6 months of legal battles, hearings, and more paperwork than should be humanly possible. But Min-ho had always been brilliant, and now he had something worth fighting for. 6 months later, they stood in a small courthouse with his family and a few close friends. If wore a simple white dress and a radiant smile. Min-ho wore a suit and the expression of a man who'd won everything that mattered. "I do," she said when the judge asked. "I do," he echoed, sliding a ring onto her finger with shaking hands. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." When Min-ho kissed his bride, his wife, his impossible miracle, the small group applauded. His mother cried happy tears. His father, stern and traditional, smiled. Even the government agent assigned to monitor them looked grudgingly pleased. The legal status was granted 3 weeks later. If was officially a citizen, legally recognized, with papers and documentation and rights. She could stay. Forever. They honeymooned in Jeju Island, just the two of them, and the ocean and endless possibilities. It was there, watching the sunrise over black sand beaches, that Ive told him she was pregnant. Min-ho dropped to his knees in the sand, pressed his forehead to her still flat stomach, and wept openly. "We're having a baby," he whispered against her skin. "A baby who exists because we chose love over logic, because we refused to let time tear us apart. A baby who proves some things are bigger than physics," Ive agreed, running her fingers through his hair tenderly. "Some things are written in the stars across centuries." 9 months later, they welcomed a daughter, beautiful, healthy, perfect, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. They named her Amara Minji, Amara meaning grace in Igbo, Minji meaning bright wisdom in Korean. Grace for the impossible gift they'd been given, wisdom for everything they'd learned about love. Min-ho held his daughter for the first time in the hospital room and understood finally, completely, what it meant to have everything. His research had eventually been restored under new oversight, his reputation rebuilt slowly through careful work and genuine contributions to science. The government had apologized quietly, compensated them for their trouble, and classified the entire temporal incident as a closed case. But none of that mattered compared to this moment. His wife sleeping peacefully in the hospital bed, exhausted, but smiling. His daughter in his arms, so tiny and perfect and real. His family built across centuries, across impossibilities, across every logical reason to fail. If woke up an hour later and watched him holding Amara with such tenderness, it made her eyes fill with happy tears. "No regrets?" she asked softly. "About choosing this timeline? About fighting for me? About everything you lost to keep me here?" He looked at her, at their daughter, at the life they'd built from nothing but faith and stubborn love. "Not a single one," he said honestly. "You're my greatest discovery, Ife, my impossible miracle, my proof that some things matter more than being right or safe or logical." "And you're mine," she whispered, "my love across time, my reason for staying, my home." They lived in that truth for the next 5 years, building a life that seemed almost normal on the surface. Min-ho returned to research, but gentler now, more focused on helping than proving himself. If became a celebrated cultural historian, bridging the gap between ancient knowledge and modern understanding, her unique perspective invaluable. Amara grew into a bright, curious toddler who asked a million questions and loved both her parents fiercely. They bought a house with a garden, hosted family dinners, celebrated holidays blending Korean and Yoruba traditions, built something beautiful and normal and precious from the ashes of impossible circumstances. And then one night, 5 years after they'd first met, Min-ho woke to find Ife standing at their bedroom window, staring at the stars with tears on her face. "What's wrong?" He was beside her instantly, arms around her waist. "Nothing's wrong," she said, leaning back against him. "I was just thinking about that night, when I materialized in your lab, so scared and lost and certain I'd made a terrible mistake, and look at us now." "Look at us now," he agreed, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what happened in the other timeline?" she asked quietly. "The one where I went back, where you never knew I existed?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but that version of me never held you, never watched you smile, never became a father, never learned what it means to love someone more than logic or reason or self-preservation. So I don't envy him. I pity him. She turned in his arms, looking up at him in the moonlight. I love you, Min-ho, across time, across worlds, across every impossible thing that tried to keep us apart. I love you too, he said, kissing her softly. Always, forever, until the end of time itself. And that's how their story ended, not with tragedy or separation or impossible choices, but with love. Simple, stubborn, impossible love that had rewritten the rules of time itself. Because sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't found in laboratories or equations. Sometimes they're found in the impossible woman who appears in your life when you least expect it and changes absolutely everything. Min-ho and Ife had found that, had fought for it, had built a life around it, and they would protect it, nurture it, and celebrate it for the rest of their days. Because real love, the kind that matters, doesn't follow the rules. It makes its own. And theirs had made the most beautiful rule of all, that some souls are meant to find each other, no matter how many years or miles or impossibilities stand between them. They'd proven it, lived it, and would continue living it, together, always. Beautiful souls, if this story made you believe in love that transcends time, do me a favour, hit that like button, subscribe to AfroKorean Drama Hub, and drop a comment telling me, would you cross centuries for your soulmate? Would you risk everything for a love that defies all logic? Share this with someone who needs to remember that true love is worth any sacrifice, any fight, any impossible leap of faith. And remember, the best love stories are the ones that break all the rules and prove that destiny is stronger than time. Thank you for watching, my cherished, beautiful friend. Stay blessed, stay loved, and I'll see you in the next incredible journey. Until then, keep believing in impossible love.